Thank you so much, John, for that rousing introduction. And we're very honored to be here. Thank you so much to the organizers for having us among this international crowd. As John said, we, the Qiao Collective, are a group of China's diaspora in the West, committed to anti-imperialism and socialism. Many of us are actually Chinese Americans. This topic really speaks to the core of our identities. And to be totally blunt, these elections mean very little to us because the United States has never stopped being hostile to China and the Chinese people, even to those Chinese people living as residents and citizens within their own borders. Although Chinese and Chinese Americans are indeed citizens and residents in different countries, our destinies are ultimately linked. And through our experiences rife here with the suffering at the hands of the imperialists, we hold that the threat of the new Cold War remains unmitigated regardless of who wins this election. A Biden presidency indeed promises to return to normal, and that normal of what? Pretty sounding words, full of aspirations of a vibrant democracy towards a law-based international order with respect for human rights. A Biden presidency has already promised to restore America's place on the world stage. I beg the audience's indulgence as I come from a little bit more particular angle in this discussion to share a little bit as a Chinese American about how we fared under this normal, under all these years of such lofty words and what these words mean to us as Chinese Americans committed to anti-imperialism and socialism. As Chinese Americans, we live in a country that promises liberty and justice for all, but it's becoming more and more clear that that trust is misplaced and has been grossly betrayed throughout the years. One needs only to look at the history of our time here from the very early days to see that this is the case. In the 19th century, particularly on the West Coast, it was us Chinese Americans who built the railroads, who tilled the land for fertile farmlands and built the cities. And how were we rewarded for that? With exclusion, with the denial of basic rights, such as the right to testify at court, and even with ethnic cleansing. The audience surely knows the man Qian Xiesun, whose contribution to American science cannot be overstated, who co-founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And how was he rewarded? With imprisonment at the height of McCarthyism, that age of paranoia driven by the loss of China. And of course, in today's tech boom that the Americans enjoy, the Chinese Americans have also played a not insignificant role. Yet we are thanked by increasing charges of espionage and witch hunts, which only grow more severe day by day. No, Chinese Americans are not the ones to receive justice in this country. When Vincent Chin was murdered in Michigan, his two murderers got probation, because apparently that is the worth of a Chinese life in this country. In the 2008 global financial crisis, a crisis recognized to have been caused by the irresponsible practices of American banks, the only bank to be criminally prosecuted in the United States was Abacus Bank, a Chinese American-owned family bank based in Chinatown. And just like in the 19th century, we are now blamed for the China flu, for the China disease, for Kung flu. With current hate crime numbers spiking, from March to June, 2,128 hate incidents reported against Asian Americans in connection with COVID. Just as constantly as us Chinese Americans are used, abused, and betrayed by the United States, so it is constant that xenophobia and anti-China policies prevail with bipartisan support. It was under Clinton, a Democrat, that the Chinese embassy in Belgrade was bombed. It was under Bush, a Republican, that the United States began to host certain governments and exiles and their affiliated organizations, hoping to foment separatism within China. And it was under Obama, a Democrat, that despite Chinese cooperation in stabilizing the global economy after the financial crisis, the United States chose to militarize the Western Pacific under its pivot to Asia. And of course, it was under Obama that the NSA hacked Huawei and the United States increased its interference in Hong Kong, with both issues obviously coming to a head under Republican Trump. And of course, all administrations criticized China on environmental issues, even though it was the United States that exported waste and trash to China. This all shows the actual relationship the United States desires with China, a purely exploitative one, in which the United States may extract Chinese labor, wealth, and resources at will. And this definition extends to the earliest days of the relationship. The illicit opium trade in 19th century China created a new class of fabulously wealthy Americans, whose benefactors include Harvard University, the Delano family of Franklin Delano Roosevelt fame, and the Forbes family, of whom former Secretary of State John Forbes Kerry is a descendant. Today, the United States merely seeks the same goal. I mean, the United States was satisfied when China was making cheap toys for export to the United States. This is simply the pillaging nature of the country known as the United States, which, after all, is built on a stolen continent, built with stolen labor, of which Chinese people have played a role. Yet it is not enough that the United States seeks to exploit the Chinese people. When the Chinese people stand up, the United States gets angry and deploys egregious violence. In the war against American aggression in Korea, after suffering defeat at the hands of a new People's Republic, the United States resorted to biological and chemical warfare against the Chinese and Korean people, with some authorities even considering nuclear attacks. The same nuclear threat hung over other conflicts in Asia, including Vietnam and Straits crises. It is telling that the United States is so cavalier about nuclear use when the target is Asians or Pacific Islanders. It is very clear from this history that no matter whether us Chinese people are in the United States or outside of it, we are not human to the imperialist, but rather instruments to be used, abused, and destroyed at will. And us Chinese Americans know very well the consequences of looking like the enemy. For in the height of World War II, the United States threw 120,000 Japanese Americans into concentration camps for the simple sin of being Japanese. If that was not enough, the United States ordered 2,264 citizens and permanent residents of 12 Latin American countries, of these 1,800 Peruvians, into these concentration camps. Again, for no other sin than to be Japanese. And this is all ruled legal and constitutional by the Supreme Court. All this suffering, all this hardship, and for what? Fresh air and freedom, as somebody once put it? Real wages, as has been pointed out, has stagnated in this country for 40, 50 years. And we Chinese Americans are largely such average Americans. In fact, Asian Americans are one of the groups hardest hit by unemployment due to the COVID crisis. Make no mistake, this is a new McCarthyism, a new age of injustice, a new Cold War. And it was coming regardless of who wins, who won this election. Because these are not problems that began with Trump. And these are not problems that will end with Biden, no matter how many beautiful words he and others like him will use. Because for us as Chinese Americans, these are problems that began when the colonists first arrived on this continent, proceeding to massacre and dispossess an entire continent of people, destroying entire ecologies and environments, and building up their country with slave labor and gross betrayal of their own professed values. For us as Chinese Americans, these are problems that began when the imperialists destroyed our ancestral homeland in the 19th century. We don't see the character of the United States changing anytime soon, because history teaches us that we have always been its enemies, either to be crushed and killed or to be used and exploited. The only time Chinese people are accepted by the United States is when they act as its mouthpiece, praising its supposed freedom and superior political system, validating criticisms and attacks against China. The audience is surely familiar with these types of Chinese diaspora, but please know that these people, loud as they might be perched on their platform given to them, do not represent the working Chinese American, those who labor long and hard hours at low-paying jobs, live in poor housing and downtrodden environments, and constantly face state violence. In this light, Qiao's role and mission does not change with any election. We seek not only to oppose imperialism and war against China and to resist this new Cold War, but to work hand in hand with our comrades here to effect actual justice in this land, which has eluded this continent since the first days of this country. Thank you again so much for having us. It's been an honor.